So when we start with ADO, right? So let me just log into this database also. So there are few steps which we have to understand, right? Before actually starting up the ADO. So in general, right? So we will have a user interface, right? So this user interface can be anything or any layer, right? So what exactly are these layers and all, right? Like what exactly is the tile way of programming and all? We'll actually understand that when we actually start our UI mainly. So when it comes to UI layer and all, so let's say our console application is one of the user interface layer, right? And let's say your web application, right, where you can actually see the information on web page, right, is one of the user interface layer. And there can be some middle layers which need connections with database and all. Now definitely the layer, right, these layers will have to communicate database, because database is one of the way, right, to store data, right, and that data we can actually persist in tables, and we can actually use the data to display on UI. Now, so when we talk about the user interface and database, right? So user interface, anyways, we know that we are talking about this as a .NET, right? But database here can be anything. So it can be your SQL Server, it can be your Oracle database, right? It can be your DB2, right? Or Sybase, or maybe Microsoft Office Access database, right? Or simple Excel. It can be anything. And definitely for persisting data, right, we can use the requirement of storing data on any database can be requirement as per the architect design. So here in .NET we have all type of libraries which can connect to any type of database, right? So mainly the system.data is the main namespace in .NET, which contains all the DB communication drivers, right? We would say so these are libraries are called as the drivers, right? And definitely, as I said, ADO, right, is a set of libraries which are active data objects, right? These are a set of libraries in .NET, right? So those set of libraries will come under your system.data, right, namespace. And the communication is provided, right, through these libraries under your system.data, and there are few like system.data dot. So we have OLEDB. Similarly, you have many like system.data dot. You have something called SQL client. So this is the one which you're going to use for connecting our SQL server. Similarly, you have system.data.oracle client, right? So we have specific drivers, right? Or else we can actually use the Windows OS specific ODBC, right? So these are different namespaces which we have, which can actually create some communication, which needs a driver, and these namespaces contain all the required drivers needed for communicating to any type of database. Right? And specifically, whatever databases or whatever data sources mainly are popular, right? So for them, like you have Microsoft SQL Server, or we can say the Oracle, right? So they have direct libraries created, right? And these drivers, right, are provided by vendors, definitely, right? Every time a database vendor upgrades anything from any database now, right, they release um, drivers to the market, right? So it can be form of binaries, it can be form of libraries, it can be form of jars, right? They actually release every sort of information so that communication can be made, right? So these are the main libraries which we have, right? So here in an application, so when we talk about a layer, dual layer database, so these are the main things we have. So in an application, you can have your user interface and storage mainly, right? So these are the main things which you can have under application. So the place where you can store data, the place where you can actually get the data and display to you, right? So the communication is something which you're gonna make, right? So this is something which you're going to see, right? To how we can actually make communication now. So the pattern how we are going to connect to database and create a communication channel. Uh, let's see all the steps, right? How we can actually um, do it, and then we will write a sample program using all the libraries. Okay? So mainly there are two layers. Oops. Your driver manager layer. So this is for our understanding that we are creating, the two different layers, but we're gonna see the specific steps too. We have a driver manager layer, and mainly we have something called application layer, right? So in driver manager layer, you will get the first step, right, which is your loading the driver. So definitely, .NET as such directly cannot connect to database. It needs a support library to connect. Those support libraries are under these namespaces, right? So this is something, as soon as you import a namespace, which means you are loading a driver as such, right? And then your second step and all comes under application. So once driver is ready, then we are going to first connect to database, right? So creating connection is something which is very important. First, when you create a bridge between your application and your database, then you can actually create some communication, right? And then we are going to write a query, right? Or we are going to call any SP, anything, right? So this will be done through something called statement, right? Or mainly command. So after connecting, as we have database connection active, right? So here in this, so in these steps, each and every step is correct, dependent on the previous step. So until and unless the connection is successful, you can't go to the next step where you can actually use your statement or command to run a query, right? So once you are done with the query and creating a command for that, then it's time to execute it. So we will execute the query using command. So when we execute it, what this library will do for us is it will actually send the query or store prop or anything which we have called to execute, right? It will be executed at database side, and then it will return a result. So that's our first next step, which is process results. So processing result is something which is our next step, right? So once the processing of results are done, then very important step, we're going to close. And throughout all this, we have one common step, which I'm going to make it on 7 to handle exceptions. So few steps are very important, right? So it's very important that to handle exception here, and we are going to see the way how we can actually handle and log the bugs. So these are the complete end-to-end steps we have. So let's go ahead and see the sample program, right? And we will see in sample all the libraries which you can actually use in ADO. So that is important. So each and every step is important. And anyways, after actually working out in sample program, then we'll see different ways how to run, how to execute, how to process and all, or something which you want to see. Right? So first let's see end-to-end steps after it. So let me create a new project here. Add new project. So let me use a console application and let me say so ADO, right? Perfect. Now first step is to load driver. So loading driver is nothing but we'll have to actually import the namespace which we are going to use, right? So our namespace is system dot your data.oracle client and system.data. So system.data contains all. So let's import system.data and system.data.sql client, right? So here I'm going to say system.data and you have your system.data.sql client. So this is your main step here. Now, so let's go back. So we are done with the first step. So loading driver is simple over here, right? That once you call your library, then you're ready to use it. The next is your connect. So connecting to database. Now we have few things here. We know that initially, if you want to connect to database, right, you have to connect to server, right? Now server, I'm talking about web server, or I would say physical server, right? Let's say Windows 2008 R2 or now, right? And this web server and your DB server, right? Let's say they are deployed on the physical server. So you have to provide your physical server name, right, and your DB server name. So we have actually understood the physical server, DB server, if you remember. So Windows Server 2008 R2 is the OS which you have installed, and definitely for that machine there will be some host name or some IP, let's say, right? At least it will have IP, right? Because you can actually give even the IP here, and you have your DB server name. So in this server, first you'll have to provide the server name, and in that server you have to provide a DB server name, because in one server you can have multiple DB servers, right? And then you'll have to provide your database in that DB server, right? So all for this connecting database you'll have to provide, so your what type of credentials we use, right? Because definitely for connecting to database we need credentials, right? Now these are the information which we need in order to connect to database. We need a physical server, we need a DB server, we need details of database which is deployed or created inside this DB server, and the credentials of the same. So let us see how we can actually format these things into for connecting a database. So we normally call it as a connection string, right? So the connection string is a main input to the main class, which is a SQL connection to connect to database, right? So let me first create a simple string and call it as connection string. So here, we're gonna start. So we have a data source. So these are like key and value pairs which we are going to provide with the semicolon separated, right? Which will be input to the SQL connection. So first let's create a connection string. So this connection string is nothing but we are providing all the information in some format, which is a standard format which we have to use. Definitely once you provide this, and then we're going to connect to database. That's how. This we'll see. First let's create the connection string, and this is going to be common across. Right? Now data source, what is the server? Now let's go back here and see. Now you can see here, whenever you see this format of server, right? This you can see there are two things. SreeHub-bio is my host name or my server name. Slash, you can see MSS SQL 2012 is my database server, right? So let me right click on properties here. Now here you can actually see in the server properties, right? You can clearly see the name, right? Will give you the entire one and the product and all, right? You can see, let me copy this server and the DB server here, right? Go back and say this is my database server, the main server I have, and in this server I have my database server. So let me put @ over here so that I can escape things, right? And now I'm going to put a semicolon because still here I have provided the SQL server and the machine where SQL server is deployed, and then I'll have to provide my database. So that database key is called as initial catalog. So initial catalog is called as the database name to which you want to connect. So here, what is the database name you want to connect? It's like you have organization, right? This is my database which I want to connect. Let's give that. And then the credentials. So as we know that we have our Windows authentication enabled for this, right? For the user we are going to connect. So we can use something called integrated security as SSPI. Either you can say SSPI or you can actually say yes over here, right? So this is your connection string which you are going to use to connect to database main. One step, fine. And then we are going to create the main class of connection. So for connecting, we have something called, everything starts from SQL. Like all the libraries right here start from SQL. Whatever we have libraries under SQL client. Right? So you have SQL connection. Now this is the main class which we normally use to create a connection. Right? So SQL connection, let me call it as con is equal to new connection. So yes, this is a class which we are going to connect. So to this class, I'll have to provide my connection details before even starting anything. So I can use this con dot. We have something called connection string. Here you can see what is the input. Now this is a property you have. Let me provide my con string. Now to this class, the input of connection string is provided, right? And once it is done, we have an option to open. So now once you say open, now this will open up the connection. Right? So this is what is your actual connection where you are providing a connection string and opening up. Now here we'll have to actually handle the first step where I've created my SQL connection and I have to make sure it always should be closed, because database connection, if you keep it open, right, the traffic is going to be heavy on databases. So what we're going to do, we're going to actually use our try catch, and finally, so this is where you will understand how does finally help us, right? So here what I'm going to do, I will take these two steps inside the try catch, right? So which means even if something happens, I want to close my connection. That's a plain funda. So I'm going to close it under finally. So here I'm going to check if my connection, even before this, let's say here I'm just going to create the variable, and then in under the try catch I'm going to instantiate. Right? So here I just created a very simple variable called SQL connection as null, which is just a variable, right? And everything I'm going to use inside try catch, because we never know, even before connection string you may have something else, right? So always create here, and in finally whatever exception happens or not, we have to make sure SQL our connection to database is closed, right? So here I'm going to say if my connection is not equal to null, because initially we have it as null, right? If it is not null, then say con dot close. So your con dot close, the method open is for opening a connection, the internal method close is for closing a connection. This is the right way to handle our database connections, and in finally we should actually use the closing of connection, so that even if any exception happens, we are safe that the connection is closed, disposed. Fine. So first we're going to check if it is connected or not. Let's say, so first let me create sorry, console.read key here, and here we are going to check. So how can we check if, let's say if gone, we have something called status state. Your connection states, here you have these states in your connection. It can be open, it can be closed, it can be in connecting status or executing or fetching, it can be anything. Let's say I want to check if connection is open, right? So let's say if it is open, I'm going to say connection, or rather I would say database connection else we have the console dot write line up, let's say fine. So here so yes, Trilo, you have any questions?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Good, yeah, yep, I can hear you.
Yeah, I was saying, is this not a part of exception handling?
Which one? This one?
Yeah, the if-else statement.
You mean to say this part of program?
Yeah, instead of checking like this, can you just put it in the exception list where it just pulls out the exception?
Yeah, I mean,
The connection
no,
is
this part of program may, don't have to be in exception. See, why I'm actually showing it here is, let's say if any, see, while opening up your connection, right, if anything happens, if any error or if any exception, or if your database is down or server is down, right, it will not even move to the next step, right? It will immediately give an error, and here we are going to anyways handle exception like this. Let's say I'm going to say console.writeLine of DB error, right? Let's say, and then we're going to say, let's say exception object, let me handle it as ex.message, let's see, on top, right? So here I'm going to say connection failed anyways, right? Anyways, I'm going to say here in next step that connection failed right? But here, let's say even if you're open, right? Let's say your connection open, right? And let's say the state is not in opening state, right? Then, even if it is a connection state, because for every database SQL connection, there will be some timeout, right? So what happens in any SQL connection class is it will start connecting database. First instance, if it doesn't get the DB server or a server it is looking for, right? It won't directly say that, directly give exception that it is not connecting. It will try for some time. It will trigger multiple times for some timeout, say. So let's say if we have some timeout of 100 milliseconds, right? Then in that 100 milliseconds, it will pulse, it will pulse until the connection is successful. And in that 100 milliseconds, if it is not done, then it will immediately throw an exception here. It won't even move to the next step.
Yeah.
Okay. But why we are actually handling here is in case, even if you open and if it is in a connecting state, right, then that connecting state is again a problem to us, right? So connecting state definitely can be used whenever you run your query or whenever your command is running and all, right? Because it may go down and come up, right? But this is something you are handling because if connection itself uh, is not active, right, then there is no meaning in moving forward, correct? So each and every step we are going to see that, okay, if connection is open only, then move. That's why we are just showing that, okay, connection is successful. Because we can't say connection successful here in catch, right? Because definitely not. If connection is successful, it doesn't even throw exception at this step at least. Correct? True?
Correct.
Okay, now let's run this program. Let me put a debug point and let me make this project, a startup project. And let's run this. Now here I'm just showing you. So here we created a. Now you can see it took some time over here to connect. Right now this connection is successful. You can see that it is successful and you can have the database connection open successfully. Right? So it took some time there you can see. Now let me show you something else. Let's say we actually made something wrong here. Let's say I just gave my DB server name wrong. Now, which means it definitely will go to this server and will search for this database. Let me show you. So here you can see, right? Now definitely for the first instance it will not get this database, but it will not stop. It will pulse the database for some time. Right? Now you can see our step is even now in open. Now you can see after some time it will go to exception. Now this is the time where the timeout will happen. So now you can see here the exception that a network related or instance specific error happened while establishing the connection to SQL. The server was not found or was not accessible, right? So here you'll actually get that your SQL server configure may not allow your connections. Right? So this is your SQL exception which you'll get. Right? That's what happens. If any open anything happens here, right? It won't even move. It will actually give an exception if your server is down or database is offline, right? Or if your database is down, right? Or your server and database both are down, right? So anything happens during while connecting the network, it will go down. So now let's give the right database name and you run it. So immediately, if everything is fine, you get your database connection successful. Fine. So this is the first step we have, that our database connection successful is something which is a connection. Now we're done with connection using SQL. Now let me put a simple line over here. So this is the way we handle our connection, and this is going to be common across complete ADO.NET. right? So here next thing you have your query, which you have to run and see the command you need. So we're going to see a simple way how to run this. So as I said, we will be using command. So we have something called SQL command, right? The first way of running query we're going to see, which is SQL command, right? Let me call it as CMD, is a class. And while instantiating itself, let's say, see, there are two ways. Either while instantiating your classes, right, you can give your details, whatever details it is looking for, right, or else you can actually give after creating your class. Anything is fine, right? So here you can see it needs a connection string, command text. Its command text is nothing but your query. So here what we'll do, before even creating this command, we'll have to create a simple query. So let's say I'm going to create simple query. Let me call this query called select star from. So what is the table we have here? We have your employee, let's say, right? Let's say employee. This is my query, and this is my connection object, which is active now with the connection to this database. Right? So here first let me provide a query command. I have to provide connection. You can see the second parameter I have to provide a SQL connection. So I'll provide my con. So con is my SQL connection object, which is active now. Now we are ready with the command, and we are ready to execute it, right? So now we can see, as per the query, when we say select start from employee, right? So let's run the same even here. Let me take a new query. So here you have, either you can click on new query or control N, right? Both will give you a new query. So let me run this. You can see this query will give me rows and columns, right? It is not giving one cell or one particular data to handle, but it is giving me some rows and columns so that I can handle it, right? So definitely we should have something in our hand in .NET so that I should be able to read rows and columns, and in each row I should be able to read each cell by cell, right? So that we have many classes. So let's start with something called SQL data reader. We have a SQL data reader, right, which is a class which stores data in a table form with columns and rows we have. So let me call it as a reader. So this reader, so from where we are going to get? We are going to get it from command. We know that this command now is pointing to the command text which we want to run through some connection. What the SQL connection we made. So we are going to use something called execute reader. So this execute reader is a step which we said execute. Now this is going to execute this query through this connection, get the results, and it will populate it to reader. Now your reader is something which will have all the details in your rows and column form. Now let's see how we can actually process the results. So the next step is processing results. So let's see how we can actually process the result. The processing result is nothing but we'll have to loop on this reader row by row to get the data, right? Now SQL data reader is like a mapping or a hashing table you have, right, where once you are done with reading one row, right, you can't track back and read, right? It's like every data row you can actually read once, and then it will actually move on to the next row. So as soon as you read it, you can't actually track back, right? So now a reader is like a cache memory you have where you can actually read through one by one. So we'll use a while loop to loop on. So for when you say reader, right, we have an internal method called read, right? So this read will actually give us a boolean. You can see on mouse over, you can see that it gives boolean. So let's say reader contains some 4 rows, right? So whenever we say reader.read, then automatically the pointer in this reader will point to first row first, right? And all the cells belonging to these columns are in first row, right? Now here, so now when it enters into the while loop, you can use the same reader object to read cell by cell. How? Let me show you. So let's say in this complete list, I want to read my employee ID and name, let's say, right? So here, let's say I have employee ID, let's say EMP ID is equal to, you have a reader dot, you have something called get. So get is your main method prefix you have to get different type of data. Now here we know that your ID is something which is your integer type, let's say, right? Now this is going to get in integer. So let's say I'm going to use int 32, right, of. Now here you'll have to provide the index, right? What index? Index is nothing but obviously each and every column over here will be each index for reader. So definitely each index for each column will start from 0. You have 0, 1, 2, 3 and so on. Right? So I'll provide 0. This will give me my employee ID. Similarly, let's say I'm going to take name, employee name. Name is, let's say, string, right? So you have a reader and dot get string of what? It will give me a name. So let's print both console dot writeLine of your employee ID plus some space plus your name. Right? And if you want to read remaining, yes, you can go ahead. Let's say employee contact. Let's read one more cell. We have string. Let's say contact is equal to reader dot get string of previous. Right? So let's add contact. Fine. Now here I'm looping on and I'm printing all the information which I'm getting. So let's run this and see how this will get data. So let's run the program. Here you can see database connection opened successfully, and you can see all the data 1, 2, 3, 4, SID, SID1, SID2, Ben, and then contact details we received. So this is how we write a program in .NET using ADO to get all possible values, right? DML communications. Now in this query, you can actually make the query dynamic now, right? Different ways how you can actually provide the data. Right? Now this is your main way how you can actually write a program in ADO for database communication. Right? So now let's get into more details on each. Right? Now we have an idea on how to connect and all. Now in this query and command, right, we have more queries to see. Right? Definitely we can see more queries which you can write, and then mainly execution and processing results are something which is going to be different for different ways. Now this is a bit of a first way how we can actually do. So now let's see different command ways and usage of different execute results we have here. So in command, right, definitely we have seen select, right? Similarly, you'll have insert, right, or update or delete. Right? So yeah, and then similarly when we talk about execute, so we have seen execute for execute reader, right? Similarly we have other other type of execute methods. Definitely when you select, you will be getting multiple rows and columns. But when you insert rows, right, what we'll get? We'll get a simple scalar value like how many, or a just return value like how many rows got affected, right? For this, definitely we don't need to use your reader, right? For the reason that you insert, update and delete, we have something called execute non-query. We're going to use this. And also, let's say there will be some situations that you will always get only one cell. Like when I say one cell, let me show you that. So let's say I'm going to say select top one. Now this is one of the query where I'm getting the top one of employee. When I get this, I'll get only one cell, let's say, right? Which means one row I'm getting, right? Or what we can do, let's say I'm going to say select let's say EMP name from employee. So where I'm actually reading only employee name. So when I run this, see, this is different type of query where I will get only employee names, right, in this table. Now I can apply some conditions to this query. How can I apply conditions? You have a token called where, right? Now let's say I'm going to say where employee ID is equal to, let's say, 1. Which means I want to get my employee name where employee ID is 1. Let's run this. You can see. Now this is something which is a single scalar value. This will always give you only one, right, employee name, right, for that respective employee ID. Now this is something which is called as scalar value, right? Now for this, we're going to see one more execute called execute scalar. So these are different things in query and execute methods you have, right? So that you can actually see multiple things in this. Now let's go ahead here to execute non-query. We'll see the execute non-query is for insert, update and delete, right? So we'll pick any one of them. Let's pick delete option, delete query, right? And let's see how we can actually delete a row, right, from database using .NET query. Now here, what I'm going to do, let me create a new class. So let me call it as let's take class 1 itself. Now in this class, what I'm going to do, I'm going to completely take this program again because I'm going to reuse everything, right? So let me take out the complete program. So let me remove the static from this method and close this program.cs. Now here you can see I'll have to use two things. Let's say this situation may come again. Let's say you copied some program and here what is happening, here you can see it is giving error. Why it is giving? Definitely because we haven't loaded the library. Now if you don't remember the library, right, definitely you can go to that class, right click on it, and you have something called resolve. Now here it will give you the actual namespace to add. Now you can see it will add up this namespace and then you're good. Now here you can see one more thing, connection state. Again this says this is not loaded. Right click on it and say resolve system.data. Now you have system.data and SQL client added. Now the program is good without any design time errors. Right? Now here let's go back here. Let's see how you can actually create a delete statement or update anything. You can actually use anything. We have already seen insert. I just want to show you something on update and delete. Right? So in update and delete, let me show you delete so that you can see how many rows got deleted and all. Right? So here you can directly write query, or if you want a complete format, you can right click on employee, right? And let's say script table as you can here you have your delete. Here this is a simple condition, simple delete, right? Where let's say here you can write delete from your table called employee, right? So if you do this, right, it will delete everything. Then that's why I'm gonna write condition where employee ID, let's say, is equal to 4, right? So even before deleting, let's say, let's start from employee, run it. It's very important. That's why I said every time you do something, select it and run it. Otherwise, if you just run it directly, right, it will execute everything. It's not good, right? So let's say employee ID 4, I want to delete. Let me run this step. So which means it is going to delete this complete row. So when I run this, right, see what it will give you. Yeah, okay, fine. So it will give us some error like FK reference. See, now as this employee and employee details are connected, right? So that is why it is giving error, right? Anyways, so in employee details we are using this 4. So let's not to worry. Let's say I'm going to give it 3. So in this employee details we have 1 and 4, I hope, if I remember. Yeah, 1 and 4. So 1 and 4 employees are already connected to this employee details, right? So which means until unless you delete here, you can't delete from employee. That's a connection. It says that there is a for loop relation conflict. So here we're going to delete 3 first, let's say. So let me run this. Now you can see 1 row is affected. Now this is what it will give you. It will give you how many rows got affected. Now let me run this. Now you can see there are only 1, 2 and 4. 3 got deleted permanently. Fine. So here let me use the same query right here, right, and let me give you 2. Why? Because 3 is already deleted, right? Now when you run it again, it will give you 0 rows because 3 is not there again, right? So that's the reason why it will give. Now let me just remove these things, delete. Don't keep your delete always open, or at least you can comment. So commenting in SQL editor is just 2 hyphens, right? Just 2 hyphens, or else your shortcut, which we normally use in Visual Studio, which is Control KC and Control KU, also work in your SQL Server Management Studio. Fine. Now if you run it, you will get the details. Now let's go back to our program and see this. You have delete from employee where employee ID is 2 and all, right? Now here the way we read is different, right? Let's remove everything. We have a command which is perfect. Now here we are gonna see. So here we know that it will return some rows, right? How many rows got affected, right? So let's say something called result. Result is equal to, we have a command dot, you have execute non-query. So execute non-query, here you can see int. Int is nothing but, you can read the statement there, execute a SQL statement against the connection and returns the number of rows affected. And every method it have, right, you can see the last block, what different exceptions it can give. And based on that, if you want, you can actually handle exceptions. Fine. So here, let's say console dot right line, let's say result, let's say rows got affected, let's say. Right. Now here you have this. So let's run this. As soon as you run it, right, now definitely that later you can see 1 row. Now go back here and run it again. You already have 2. So now when you execute here, now you can see you have only 1. This is how we can delete. Right? So this is how we delete the anyways, write the DML of delete and how to handle number of rows. That is a second situation where you are getting your insert, delete, and update. Now the third one, the third way how we execute is getting the scalar value. So let's write something called employee name, let's say where your employee ID is 1, let's say. So this will always give you singleton value. Now this is, let's copy this query and let's go back to Visual Studio and let me now use this. Okay, it says it's all running. Let me close it. So let's say I'm gonna use this query now, right? Now the way I have to handle is different, because this will not give, if I use non-query, it will not give me the right result. So here I'm gonna use something called execute scalar. Now this will give you object, you can see, because it can be anything. Now in this situation you are getting a string, right? And sometimes if you are using employee ID, it may give you integer. So that's the reason why, irrespective of anything, it will give us the parent of all, which is object. Right? And as we know that we are looking for string, you can actually make it string over here, and here you can call dot to string, your object dot to string, and that will be converted and you are getting a result, right? So here you can print that result. Right? Now run it. You can see your singleton set will be done. So this is how we normally use the data, right? How we return from your employee, right? A singleton value, you can use a execute scalar here. So these are the different ways how you execute. These are the different DML operations which you can use across, right? The ways how you create different queries, different execute models, and different results processing here, right? Now in command itself we have another way, which is a very important way, right, which is going to change the way the query is executed. Now let's get back here and understand what exactly is a change. Now let me go to program.js. Now here let's go a step in depth of these libraries to understand more. Now when I say command, right, now this is completely connection oriented. See, once you start connection, if connection is, let's say, active, and as soon as you create a command, so let's say while executing your connection is down, then you will get an error here, right? Definitely, because your connection is something which should be active, throughout a program, whatever we have written here, including whenever you execute it, you return reader, right? Now even this reader, as of now, as we were seeing only few rows, right? We got everything, but the actual behavior of reader is, it will actually read first couple of rows, let's say first 100 rows, right? And then as soon as you are progressing number of rows reading, right, then it will go, which means the next set of row it will query again and get the next set of. Similarly, after 100, let's say there are 1000 rows, right? Let's say there are 1000 rows. The executor, it will first read 100, and then use the connection again, and then read next 100. Similarly, next 100, which means until you are done with complete row reading, right? Rows, reading, your connection should be active. That's the reason why we normally call your SQL data reader is a complete connection oriented data set, right? If anything happens to the connection, right, now, which means your execution may stop in between. Let's say after reading your 300 rows, right, your connection got down and you're trying to read next 100, right? This may go down. That's why your data reader is completely connection oriented. But for this reason, right, when we say we have connection oriented, definitely we should also have something which provides data in disconnected mode also, which means at one shot of execution it should get everything. We do have that way, right, and we do have different class to actually run and use it. So let us see what exactly is that. Let me create a new class. Let me close the program. And class here. Let me put it as class 2. Now here again, let me remove the static from my class 1. Close it up. Program.js. Now again, I'm going to take complete. Let me copy this and paste it. So everything is going to be same. You're creating your connections and everything is going to be same. The only thing is the way we are executing and the way we are processing is different. That's what I said, right? So SQL connection, let me dissolve it. And also connection state, let me dissolve it to system.data. Fine. Now, so let's keep the select start from employee. Fine. And here, we're going to change the way we are reading. So we are not going to use the data reader anymore. Right? Two things, we're going to use something called adapter. So we have something called adapter which we can use, right, which will give us a way, right, which actually gives us something called data set, where all information will be dumped at once, right? And this data set is set of tables. Now we're going to learn new concept here under data sets. So this is something which is combination of data tables, right? And data tables is a data table mainly is a powerful temporary cache table you have in .NET, which in which you can actually store your rows and columns here. Fine. Now let us see how we can actually use adapter. And so here again, as I said, we will have something called SQL adapter in here. You have SQL data adapter. This is your actual class which you can use. Let's say you have adapter is equal to new. So to this SQL adapter, again we know that anyways we'll have to give the query you want to run or the connection and all. So let's see different overloaded arguments you have. The first one you can see, you can directly give your command. Your command you can directly give input, because for the command we are providing a query and connection string, right? So your adapter will take details from this. Or if you don't want to use command, then definitely you can give your query string and connection string separately, right? So here as we have command ready, so let's give command cmd itself. Now your adapter is connected to your command. Right? Now, for getting your adapter, right, for running this adapter, you need something called data set. Data set is a class. You can see data set is under your system.data. It is not under any SQL client or Oracle client or anything. So this data set is a one set which you can use for any type of data, any type of database you want. So as of now, anyways, we are using a SQL client adapter, right? It will fill the SQL data into this. So let me call it as DS. I've taken this data set. Now I'll have to fill it. So your adapter dot, you have something called fill method. Obvious. So this is something which is your execute and filling. The fill will run the query through this connection and get the data. So the data will be retrieved in form of table, and that table will be dumped into your data set. That's what it does. Each and every row will be retrieved and be filled into data set, which means data set contains a table which actually contains all the information of employee. So this is the step which executes and data. Now till here, this is something which is your executing of we created a command. Now in this command we used some latest one more class called adapter. Right? Now we're gonna see we have used an adapter, we have used execute to fill the data set, and now we're gonna see how to process this set. This is important again. So in this data table, right? Sorry, data set, we know that data is in data tables, which means data set is combination of multiple data tables. Fine. So I'm gonna take data table object here, let me call this dt, is equal to, you have ds, which is dataset dot tables of. You can see each and every table will be arranged in an array, right? And let me give 0 here, which means the first table, whatever I will get, definitely it will be your this. Now how will we get multiple is something which we'll see once we are done with this. No worry. Now your data table here, right, contains two very important things. Definitely a table contains the columns and rows, but how can we make sure this data table, how to read this data table, right? So this data table contains data row and data column, right? Definitely if you know rows and columns or rows and column objects, right, you can read things. Now let me create a for each loop. Now first step, I'm going to take data row. Each data row, let me call it as dr, which is my data row. In my data table dot, you have something called rows, right? So this rows is a collection of your data rows. Open bracket and close bracket, right? And inside this, I'm going to create one more for each loop, which contains each column, which is your data column. Let me call it as DC, data column, in your DT, which is data table dot columns. Now if you have each row, we'll go to each row, and in that row we'll read column by column to read the cell. That's what we are going to do, right? Now here let me just write console.write line of, you can see row, which is dr, of which cell, we know data column DC. This is how we read. Now in this row I want to read this column. That's what I did. In this row dr, I'm reading cell, which means you are reading cell by cell. In this each row you are reading cell by cell here. That's it, right? And then first let's say you're going to say write here, so that we can write each cell. Right, there's some space here. So we are just creating some space to write the next cell. And once each row is done, right, we are going to create a new line so that the next row will be created in this line. This is how we can actually, move on with dr, which is data row, and DC data. Now let's move. Let's first run this, and then we'll come back to how we can actually even make these tables in loop. Right? So let's run this. Okay, what error we are getting? Entry point. We don't have this entry point. Let me keep the static here. Let's run this. Now you can see we have all the data, right, which we got here. You can see one SID connection, so and so, blah blah, everything. We got everything. So this is how we normally read data, right, and using a data set or SQL data adapter. Right. So one step ahead again here. So let's say I'm going to create for each loop, which is going to, let's say, include this, which means, so this needs a data table, right? Definitely I'm going to take data table. Now, instead of considering only first table, let's say if it data set contains multiple tables, then what we are going to do, let's not take only one, let's take this complete collection, which is our, let me call it as DT. I'm going to call DS, which is dataset dot tables, which will give us, let me remove this. Now this is how we do all the tables we need in DTS. Right? Now this is a generic program we have. So one generic program will give you everything related to tables. So let's say after this each table is done, let's say I'm going to write line, let's say twice, so that it will give, so even this will give you a same data set. Now let us see what actually will give us two tables. Now here let's say we use self starter employee, right? So let me just give Let me select all these and see. When I run all, right, what happens is, if I have multiple data sets which I'm getting, it will actually give multiple data sets here, you can see. Right? Now first will give you just employee name, second will give us all the data sets, and even this will give you all, right? Which are different data sets here. Or let's say here in select employee, let's say I want only employee ID and employee name, let's say. Now select all and run. See, you'll get different data sets. Now the same feasibility even you should have while reading your data, right? Now how can I write query in this way? So here in .NET you can write each query, right, using semicolon separator. Not only in .NET, even if you're writing ASP, you can write things in semicolon. Let's say here I'm going to take this. Now my query contains three different queries. One select star, and another which gives only employee name, and the next one which gives employee name. Now definitely it will contain three tables, right, because it is written in three different data sets. Now it will return three tables to us, and each table we are gonna loop. Now let me run this. Now you can see you get three tables. The first table is the complete self star, and second table, anyways, it is giving you only set, and third table will again give you the employee ID. So this is how we read your data sets here, right? Mainly for single table or multiple tables. Now this is how we normally use ADO.NET for reading end-to-end data, right? In terms of with using all the core libraries here. Right? So any questions here? So this is about your complete ADO.NET we have. We started from SQL Server understanding, and then we understood all the libraries of SQL Server.